I love opening these interviews by looking up somebody on social media, seeing what I can find out about who they are, and then reading to open the show something that I found from the person that they posted online. Kristen, for you, I pulled this from your Instagram. It says this: if we change the way the church engages with pain, we change everything. Can you talk to me about that? It is deep. You wrote it, girl. Tell us about it.
Sure. I just feel like the thing that pushes people out of church and pushes people away from Jesus is when people are dismissive of their pain or critical of the way someone is managing their pain or tries to rush someone past really complicated and nuanced pain and traumas that they're carrying because we're uncomfortable with it. And we have this idea that to follow Jesus, you have to be positive and everything has to be okay and there always has to be a pretty bow. And I think if we change the way we look at pain and engage with it and care for others who are in pain, we change the way our relationships are to pain and the way our relationships are to each other. I think that's the way we create bonds and the way that we care for each other and display the love of Christ. And the church has been really bad at it. And I think we can get a lot better and that the world would be a better place for it.
I love you saying that. I'm a communication professor, and something I often say is I don't think the church has necessarily theological issues. I think we have a lot of communication issues that are deeply impacting the way people then see God because of the way we are communicating with them, especially in areas of suffering and pain. I first actually found you on Instagram. That's how I first came into contact with your content, and I really like your Instagram. I teach social media, and often it's shocking to me because my Christian university students will say, "Oh, I don't follow any Christians online." Like, no, I can't stand Christian content, but I think you do it really well. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you view social media, how you view it as an extension of your faith?
Yeah, social media, I always look at it as when we get on social media and we're talking and we're posting things, it's kind of like we're all going into a stadium together and we're talking and we're interacting, we're having these conversations, but we don't stay in the stadium. We leave and then we take those things that we talked about in the stadium, we take them into our real life. So I try to keep social media in perspective that way. I think a lot of people, their social media is their everything and it's the hill that they die on. I think that's not a great way to look at it. And it's not a good way to integrate social media into your faith or integrate your faith into social media. So I just try to keep it as an extension of who I am and keep it on in this perspective of like, this is a place that I'm going to have conversations. I'm not going to live here. I'm not going to stay here. And I can't take the bad things that happen in the stadium out into my real life. So I just try to show up really authentically and with nuance and not put a lot of my self-worth into the feedback that comes or the criticism. Good feedback, bad feedback, whatever it is. I think we can put a lot of eggs in the social media basket and end up being disingenuous and portraying something that isn't true and creating really unhealthy habits in our lives with social media.
Do you ever have a conscious, like, are you conscious when you're posting about not perpetuating some of what you talked about earlier with, like, Christians feeling like they have to always put a smile on or be positive or go over this? Are you conscious in the way you operate your social media and kind of showing a juxtaposition there?
Yeah, probably. I probably think about things too much, so much so that sometimes I just don't post anything, but it's this tension of like it's this tension of like not wanting to be too positive, but also not wanting to be too melancholy or too sad, too depressing, too introspective because I think both extremes are not healthy and you can go from like, oh, I'm not going to be that person that's positive all the time, I'm just going to be real, and then that realness just comes across really negative and womp wompy, and that's not really true of any of our lives. There's complexity and juxtaposition in our lives, so I try to hold that tension really well and have a balance of celebrating the good without feeling bad that good things have happened to me and feeling guilty for sharing good things and sharing the hard things without harping on the hard things. It's really complicated. I spend a lot of time. I think about every word. My husband says I have an implication brain. And so I'm always thinking of a million implications of every word that I write. So it can keep me kind of static sometimes.
Talk to me about that. Do you fear sharing good things? 'cause you don't wanna make somebody else I am really sensitive to that because I know what it feels like to feel really bad, right? And to be threatened by something good happening to somebody else, especially when I'm, like, praying and praying and praying for God to open something for me. So I try to be really conscious of the good things that I post. I thought that was interesting that you said that too.
Yeah, I try to be conscious of it, and I try to, when I share good things, to not feel like I have to qualify the good things. Like, yes, this good thing happened, but I went through all these really, really hard things. So it's okay that this good thing has happened to me, because some people don't go through hard things and they have good things happen to them, and they shouldn't feel bad about that either. So I just try to be thoughtful with everything, but also realizing I can't control other people's responses to what I share. All I can do is be thoughtful and considerate and apologize if I get it wrong.
I wanna congratulate you. You have a book releasing today. It'll be a couple weeks. It'll have been out a couple weeks by the time people listen to this conversation, but it's called Even If He Doesn't. Even If He Doesn't. I was going through it. You're a fantastic writer. I laughed out loud on a few different occasions, which is always good, especially when you're talking about, like, suffering, but there are moments in there where I'm laughing out loud. You're just very funny. But in the introduction of your new book, Even If He Doesn't, you write this: "When we engage with our pain, instead of bypassing it, we allow ourselves the opportunity to know God in and through our great hurts." What do you think it is about, and I think this is, I won't speak for all the other countries, but I know that this is true of American Christianity in particular, that really struggles with the idea that God would ever allow us to suffer. Where do you think that comes from in the American church?
I think a lot of the roots to that is the prosperity gospel and having this understanding of faith as formulaic. If I do these things, if I tithe, if I'm good, if I don't sin, if I am always serving the Lord, then there are certain guarantees that God has promised me. He's going to protect me, He's going to bless me, He's going to vindicate me. And we think that if we just have our checklist perfect, then God has no choice but to give us what we've asked. And that, I think, that is very much a Western Christianity, a Western perspective on who God is, because the a lot of places in the world aren't afforded the luxury of believing that everything's going to be okay every day. Some people wake up and they don't know who in their family is going to be alive at the end of the day because they're in war or they are impoverished, and they don't have the privilege to say, well, if I just say my prayers today, then everything's going to be okay. And we translate that prosperity gospel into our understanding and our theology of suffering, and believe it so strongly that when suffering comes anyway, our faith falls apart because God isn't who we thought he was.
And it's interesting because you don't know anybody, you don't meet people who talk about these awesome years and how much they learned about themselves, right? Like we do learn about who we are when all is stripped away, who God is when all is stripped away in suffering. So can you just tell us a little bit about the story of why you wanted to write this book, Even If He Doesn't?
There were actually a few things that happened back to back in our lives. The first was we had a really painful church falling out that happened that resulted in a deep, deep relational wound. We lost our house, we lost our income because the house was the church's parsonage. So we were homeless with 3 kids. We ended up living in the Bronx for a couple months and finishing my parents' lease. They had a lease there, then they moved and we finished it out. So it was this really isolating, and that was the moment. All of the things that I've gone through that I talk about in the book, that was the thing that was the most painful because of how it affected my identity and how I understood the world and how I understood God, and my faith all but fell apart at that point. And then as I slowly rebuilt my faith, we had a few other things that happened. I witnessed a murder at my house, we lost a baby, and then we went through this crisis pregnancy, which is kind of the story that's woven throughout the book, a crisis twin pregnancy that resulted in a premature birth. And when we were going through that crisis with our twin girls, I could look back and see all the traumas in my life and see how God had used those to break these false images that I had of him. And when the Bible says that he is close to the brokenhearted, I can say that emphatically, that it's true. And through every season of trauma that I went through, there just wasn't anybody talking about the really human experience of suffering from a faith perspective, from a hopeful perspective. There are people who are talking about it in kind of like a critical of faith kind of way, but I didn't need solutions to my pain. I didn't need somebody to say, "Well, yeah, this is why God allows good people to suffer." I didn't need those kind of simplistic theologies. I just needed somebody to look at my pain and say, "Yeah, this hurts. I see it. I see you. I see what you're going through. We don't have to rush past this. We can just acknowledge what's happening." And I use the example in the book of Job's friends and how we give Job's friends such a hard time because they said such dumb things, but we sort of like bypass the fact that they sat with him for 7 days and they grieved with him for 7 days and even said, let's just not say anything because his grief is too much. And I think we skip past that in our care for ourselves and our care for each other. So I wanted to write a book that spoke to that kind of pain and made eye contact with it in a I'm not afraid to look at your pain kind of way. I'm not afraid of what this could mean for your faith. Let's just sit here and I'm just going to grieve with you.